My questions that I had is why do you think people are opposed to therapy?
So I kind of feel that a lot of people are opposed to therapy because they're not ready to do some self-work. Because a lot of times people feel like if you go to a therapist, they're going to bring up some things that you might not be ready to kind of think about, feel about, and look at. And the biggest reason I think a lot of people might say, I'm not ready.
Do you think that there is a difference in going to therapy between the younger generation, meaning people 30 to 40 and over, to the older generation, people in like their 80s being like anti-therapy and are shocked when their grandkids or nieces or nephews go to therapy?
Well, I think over the years, there's been much more acceptance for people who are in that older generation. Because I think when we look at their generation, they didn't really think about therapy as something you went and did. Because in their generation, you worked hard, you took care of your family, you took care of yourself. Your life wasn't about figuring out who you were. You already kind of knew because your family kind of told you who you were. So like if you were in the family and most of the family held morality in a good standard, you didn't question it or you didn't question yourself. I think that people in that generation would expect that people in the younger generations would go to therapy so that they could feel better about themselves. Because I think what's happening now is as generations go on, there's much more question about who am I? Where back then, nobody really asked that question, they kind of knew.
That's an interesting take on it because my grandma, she's like 80. And she talks about therapy, but like she's never actually gone.
Well, there's a stigma in her age category. Because think about that, right? If that wasn't something that was normal, why would you go to therapy unless you were admitting you were crazy? Because back then, mental illness was called crazy. We don't say that anymore. We say that somebody has some mental health issues. I often think about how did human beings, because we're all human beings. It's not like we're any different than our forefathers. We're really not. I kind of look back at that and I think, how did they do it different? Because mental illness was maybe not as reported as much as it is. Those people were not going to therapy. They were not getting medication, trust me. And I realized something really important about that time. People had families and people talked in their families for the most part. And, you got personal, but it was personal. We didn't have the internet. People were not going on, social media, finding out what everybody else is doing. And I kind of feel because of that, people had better mental health because if somebody in the family noticed that something was off, they would say something. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, I've noticed, have you been sad? And I think we've gotten away from that because so many more people are looking at what's on the outside.
So that therapy will grow as far as more people wanting to be therapists, younger people and older people wanting to go back to school to be in the field of therapy?
I do. I think it's going to open up this whole service opportunity for people to help one another. Because when you think about it, when you choose a profession like being a therapist, it is a service work because what you really want to do is help people to feel better, help people to have the ability to say, I don't want my life to be filled with anxiety. And I think helping people to achieve a better mental health is extremely rewarding and powerful. Because really, when you think about it, what are we here to do but to help each other brings us the greatest amount of happiness, not a title, or not my salary is this, therefore I'm happy, because that's not true, And then I think the other part is with more people invested in it, it will change how people actually look at mental health instead of just looking at mental illness. I think since 2020, because we had to spend time thinking about other things besides our busy life, people have been paying attention more to themselves.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like for me, as someone who's going to be a therapist in a few years, and as you know, I've wanted to be a therapist since I was 14. I'm excited to experience that, and I think for me, my goal in my mind is to level the playing field, meaning you can be a person on the Upper East Side. I'm still going to see you as a therapist. You could be a person in Brownsville, Brooklyn. I'm still going to come and see you as a therapist. I'm not about to be like, oh, you can't pay for it, I'm not going to come see you.
That's awesome. And you're absolutely right. So you're looking, again, if we look at the word whole, and we look at the word balance, you're saying that this line of work that you're going to say yes to, you're going to do the hard work, you're going to be in school, you're going to be doing a lot of writing and reading. You see in the future before you, it's open. It's not, I'm only going to work with certain people. You know, there are therapists that only work with certain people. And I think that's fine if you've been, you know, a practicing clinician for a long time, but having a lot of experience with people is what makes you a good therapist. You know, like I already know I have my favorite populations, and I found out what my least favorite is. And you only know when you do it.
Yeah.
So my favorite is working with young people, your age group. I just feel that your age group has so much zest for being alive. It literally helps me to feel more alive. And my worst population, I don't like to work with marital couples.
Oh boy.
Because I always laugh. I think, imagine you're paying a therapist money so you could tell your spouse or whoever you're with the truth. And I think to myself, that's awful that you can't be honest. You have to pay somebody to talk to them, to literally get the truth out of you so they can hear you in a safe environment. You know, like that's the extreme of, that doesn't make me feel comfortable, because it's always, you know, so you'll find out for yourself too when you're a therapist. And you should always, you know, when you're in your profession, there should always be an element of joy. I always have joy going to work, always, because you know, I said yes to this, and it's a nice balance for me.
Also, I feel like I'm going to be helpful towards the disability community as someone myself who has a physical disability, who recently has to use a chair part-time. I can only imagine like 5 years down the line when I'm like 35 and I have a client who recently became newly disabled or has always been disabled. Right. And they come to me and they're asking me, how do I deal with my new life circumstance or this old life circumstance that is making me upset?
Absolutely. So your experience and your skills since you've been in your life will prove very helpful. And that person will be happy to have somebody to engage with who actually understands it, not just, you know, it's one thing to be empathetic or sympathetic. It's another thing to actually know what's real through experience. So I agree with that.
I think certain people are becoming more aware of like therapy and how it affects your life and how it can improve your life and how it's not, you know, like a negative thing. Like personally, my twin brother, he's kind of anti-therapy. He had some like misconceptions about it. He thought that they like go around and like say everything about the client. And I'm like, no, like everything is confidential. Like the only way it's gonna get out is if the person hurts themselves or other people. Like, so I had to like explain that to him. Like, it's not just everybody saying everything. Like, no.
But most people don't know really what it is. That's the issue. You know, it's like anything else when you don't know about a profession
Mhm.
until you research it or ask somebody or try it. You just don't know, and that's not a bad thing. So many people don't know a lot about a lot of things, and you
Yeah.
would assume that people know, but then when you find out they don't, at least they're asking questions about it, which is a good step.
Yeah.
Yeah. But imagine back in the day.
Oh my gosh, I can only imagine.
I mean, when I first told my mother that I wanted to be a therapist, she actually told me before I knew it. And I was in high school and I came home one day and I said, Ma, so how come so many kids tell me their problems all the time? And she said, someday that might be your job and you'll get paid for it. And I was like, what? Like I didn't really even understand it myself, but I must have had that kind of personality that people just felt comfortable telling me they would tell me some serious stuff. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, I know. So there was something about, I mean, I was a little older than, I was probably around 14, because I was already in high school, but it happened pretty often. Like they would tell me, oh, I hope it's okay. I'm telling you this. I don't know who else to talk to.
Wow.
And I know I could tell you. And it, you know, of course I kept it to myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think what they really needed was for somebody to actually listen to them, because nobody else would. Because that's such a big part of being a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you learn that wonderful skill of deep listening, and then the whole idea of putting it together. How am I going to help this client based on what they're telling me, their story, because they have a narrative, and based on my own idea of what mental health is and all the skills that I've learned myself. Because it's such a, it really, the beautiful part about being a therapist, it's really about teaching.
Do you feel like therapy that's depicted on TV and in movies is dramatized, or do you feel like there's certain aspects that are accurate and certain aspects that are false?
Yes, I think both are true. I have seen some of it depicted in movies where it's, you know, like there's a movie called Analyze This. And it's a movie, I think Robert De Niro's a therapist, and it gets into some of the heavier issues of therapy and how serious it could be. And then there are shows that minimize it, like it's kind of only for like entitled people. You know, I think over the decades, it's had positive and it's had negative aspects. But the reality is most people who turn to therapy actually really need it.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that you're any less crazy than anybody else. Every person on the planet will experience stuff in their lives, everybody, that will warrant maybe looking into having therapy. Therapy is, of course, you have to have intelligence, let's be honest, but really it's an occupation that's very much about the heart. And they will not teach you this in school. This is something you will learn on your own. And you will learn how to allow your heart to be involved in the process of the service work.